I think what people also forget about the industry is that there isn't any rule book for it yet, and we're still relatively in the Wild West when it comes to studios and what they can and can't ask their employees to do.
Hello everybody, welcome to What Culture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by the industry veteran Stevie Ward. How you doing? How you getting on?
I'm good.
Let's talk about PlayStation stuff. Grabbed Stevie over in the office. I said, look, let's talk about PlayStation things, because you can't go a couple of days without another news report talking about layoffs, talking about various veteran people at Sony themselves, or Sony PlayStation leaving after 34 years in regards to Connie Booth. There's a lot of things that I want to read out here, and I think we're just going to do a general conversation on what's happening in the industry and how, like I said, there's so many different layoffs and key staff stepping back, whether it be Connie Booth, whether it be Jim Ryan, head of PlayStation, who says he's retiring next year, reckons he's been travelling too much, reckons that's why he's done with it. But I think there's something else, blood in the water. But in regards to Connie Booth, veteran producer for Sony, like I said, leaving after 34 years, she's been responsible for various fundamental roles, everything from the recent Spider-Man games to Crash Bandicoot on PS1, Siphon Filter, Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank Wipeout, etc. Like I said, you've also got the wider layoffs. You've got Naughty Dog letting various contractors go, their visual art support studio that helped make The Last of Us remake. They've also suffered layoffs. And so it's one of those things, and we'll get back to Jim Ryan, where it seems like Sony, to extrapolate it out, it seems like maybe there's something going on at Sony. It seems like going on with Sony PlayStation. General thoughts on where they're at?
So it's normal, it's awful to say this, but this time of year is layoff season. It's terrible that the industry has this, but it is normal for the industry to have a massive round of layoffs right before the Christmas season. It's something that after 15 years in the industry, I am now aware of and very used to seeing. It sucks. It shouldn't be this way. It's something that you kind of have to go through with all of your buddies at the different studios every time this happens. Normally, it can be the quality assurance teams that get cut, followed swiftly by probably people in the community team. And it's something that happens, generally speaking, when either revenues don't get hit for the year or the games that shipped early summer don't make what they're supposed to make, and then people get cut.
Because you think it's just more of like a wider industry thing as opposed to something, because I'm going in it from the gamer, journalist, oh my god, what's happening point of view, and that should always be then meted out by actual veteran industry experience, which is why Stevie's here. But it's one of those things where I look at the likes of, Jim Ryan stepping back, Connie Booth stepping away, even, the live service stuff that's happening over at PlayStation. It seems like The Last of Us multiplayer game isn't coming together anymore, and that makes me go, I don't know if you guys know what the hell you're doing anymore. And then there's the likes of the PlayStation Portal, and the general sort of move into live service stuff, which I would already argue that the live service bubble has burst. And we started talking about it a little bit before we started recording, and I thought I'd get your thoughts on all that wider stuff. Do you think they're just doing all right? And this is just
getting cancelled as well, which I was super looking forward to.
Because you think this is just, and it's something that's just happening industry-wide, which we know it is happening industry-wide.
It is happening
but in regards to the PlayStation side of things.
I mean, I wouldn't be able to speculate because I'm not in there at the moment, which I think is fair. And I also think it's okay to speculate about what's going on there, because that's what we're here to do.
Yes.
But it is worth noting that this is the time of year where this stuff does happen. And as far as execs stepping away, again, to be the devil's advocate with this stuff, maybe they've made enough money.
Can they ever make enough money?
Well, they can. Like, if you look at, not Connie specifically, and again, everything I say here is very generalised, if you do look at execs that have been in the industry for that long, that have been on their $6 million a year, more than that, sometimes they've made enough money.
You'd hope so.
So and they don't need to do it anymore, and that's both lovely and something that should happen, and shouldn't necessarily be seen as a sensationalist. Oh my god, that person's left. What's going to be left? Because not all of these teams.
We'd never do such a video, Stevie.
Would this channel?
What are you talking about?
Would this channel do that? But the reality is that is also what happens. Like, if you look at studios that hit their heyday in 2007, 2008, we were talking about this golden age of dev studios. Most of those staff aren't the same staff as they were now. Most of the game designers are completely different. Exec level, we were talking about, is Valve still a Remedy? We were talking about the fact that a lot of these creative teams have completely changed, and does an executive at the top changing actually make a difference to what games get made, or what price point they put on these games, or what the turnover is? The reality of that is it's more likely to be pressure from the shareholders.
Right.
and what revenue gets made when different games ship, and them saying this game didn't make that much money. We brought in people over COVID because we wanted to hire more people to test these games. We don't need them anymore. We're going to get rid of these people, and that person's made their money. They can leave. Because
that's the thing. It's like, how much is this like an annual thing? I mean, it is always an annual thing anyway, but it feels like at the minute there's so many conversations around the amount of layoffs. I saw Alana Pierce's video saying that over 6,000 people have been let go in the last across October. But to try and ground it a bit, it's just one of those things where maybe the industry is just recovering from the boom period that there was across the pandemic, and this is just kind of par for the course to some degree.
But the onus is on the actual game studios to protect from that, and that is what is not happening. Is that studios are bringing in all these new people for QA teams, bringing in all these community managers and marketing teams and a lot of like brand marketing. Like, we've seen some of the best brand marketers in the industry that I've ever seen get let go. This year from an incredibly big studio, and these people aren't just there to ship one game, and yet that's what they've said. They said, we're not going to be focusing on this game anymore. The whole brand team's going to go. The whole marketing team's going to go, and it's ridiculous. And they're not thinking about retaining this talent that should be there for more than one game. They're not thinking about the fact that they've got world-class community managers that should be there to ship more than one game. They're not thinking about the fact that a QA team can work across IPs, can work across things. They just don't think that way. They think, we've put this much budget and allocated resource to shipping game A. Game A didn't make as much money as we needed to, or the studio itself hasn't made as much money. We're going to get rid of that bottom tier of worker.
Right. Do you think that whole thing makes me wonder about the long-term planning for stuff? Like
it's ridiculous.
Like, I mean, there's things in here, like, obviously, like I said, Jim Ryan stepping down. You've got former PlayStation head Sean Layden, who's been very vocal about the state of the industry since he left, the amount of money that does do the rounds on the AAA games. Recently, he turned up on the LAN Parties podcast. He was speaking on he's also been speaking at a recent dev conference as well, talking about the difference between how much games take to make back in the day. He was quoting budgets from the PS1 era, saying between 1 and 5 million, but then they would sell it for about $60, so it made sense. It would all make sense. Whereas the budgets for an average AAA game now, or a bigger game, are more like 200, 300 excess millions of dollars, but that RRP hasn't changed, and how the idea of still going in that direction isn't sustainable. And so I think that's kind of interesting in regards to where the budgets, where they all go. Like in the movie space, and I'm bringing so many different things in here, but in the movie space,
it's good combo.
In the movie space, you've got Bob Iger for Disney, David Zaslav for like Warner Brothers and everything, and it's like getting business people at the top and just reducing the amount of creativity. Just go bigger, just keep doing all the budgetary things. That in theory would make sense, but there's not a creative soul at the heart of it. And so that's why, to me, it all circles around PlayStation.
You're breaking my heart just talking like this. So hard.
To me, it's like it all circles around PlayStation because, a lot of people celebrated when Jim Ryan stepped down. I was one of them, because it felt like that was a business face to a company that used to have so much soul to it and so much creativity and separate IPs and everything else. Which is why I mentioned Connie Booth, because she oversaw so many individual IPs over the years that a lot of people love, whether it be Crash, Sly, Cooper, Ratchet and Clank, whatever. And so it's one of those things where you just like read the tea leaves or see where it's going to go in the future, with Jim Ryan stepping down after greenlighting all the live service titles and that kind of thing. Does the money get put in the right place in the end? How much is it just par for the course? And how much is it one of those things where Sony themselves maybe don't really know what they're supposed to do next?
I think that a lot of studios, you would be surprised how many of them don't know how much money something's going to make.
Right.
And I say that from experience of Activision. With the predictions for Guitar Hero Live coming in over $1 million short on revenue, and then axing an entire dev studio. That kind of thing, if you are the big bad acty, shouldn't happen. Like, you should know that when you acquire a studio to make, rhythm action games, and this is the studio that you've got and they're an amazing asset, there is no way that you should be able to predict that you would be $1 million under sale. So the reality of that is that entire studio closed, and what was left got sold to Ubi, and it's now Ubi Leamington.
Right.
So this isn't just something that smaller studios don't know how to do properly. It's something that bigger studios wildly overestimate or underestimate. Why do they do that? Again, to please the shareholders. This is going to make millions and millions. We're going to do all this. We're going to hire as many people as we can. The pressure is on that game to ship. It's not necessarily on that game to be of good quality. They just need to ship. And then if it's broken day one, if it isn't hitting the targets, they just axe all the extra stuff that's coming, and it sucks.
Well, it's like in that regard, like, I mean, we're going to do a whole bunch of videos on the state of the industry, like, getting the veteran opinion on these things, because you have so much information and experience on this stuff.
But I'd like to also caveat that it's very specific to the experiences I've had at dev studios in the industry, and this isn't a catch-all for every game studio. It certainly isn't true for a lot of indies. It isn't true for every AAA. It's just, every single studio has a different amount of stakeholders that actually do care, creative directors that actually do care, CEOs that aren't just taking the mill and working from beaches. There's different levels to this across the board, and I am generalizing across all of this.
No, but yeah, it's still very helpful and like an indicator kind of thing as a talking point. Because another massive thing in the industry, like I was going to say before, that that kind of goes towards explaining why so many games release either broken or in need of patches straight away. The idea of something is, I mean, there's always the conversation around known shippable bugs and things like that, and the state of the game that the average consumer is expected to just accept, and then the version that gets changed in the weeks or months that follow. But in that time, the damage has arguably already been done. Like in the case of Lamplighters League and Harebrained Studios, Harebrained Schemes, the devs that make Lamplighters League and the Shadowrun titles, they already knew ahead of time that they were going to suffer layoffs because of just the way it was all coming together. And then obviously that game, ironically, was actually pretty well put together at launch, but it was on Game Pass, which is a whole other thing about whether consolidation and putting things under certain monthly models can be the way of saving this. Does that help the budget side and the risk side? Because Sean Layden, like I said before, former PlayStation head, one of the things he was talking about in regards to consolidation is that he literally says consolidation is the enemy of creativity, and talks about the idea of taking small independent wild horse studios and bringing them into larger conglomerates. That essentially
you're breaking my heart again.
That essentially means that time slows down the bigger that you are. Layden says he's concerned when studios get bought and instead of enabling a way to create their game, they maybe get absorbed into a larger enterprise that's making a larger game. So how many studios are now involved in making blockbuster games that will stagger the mind. That's kind of indicative. We mentioned Activision before, but obviously the amount of studios that were just hoovered up to get Call of Duty over the line. Not to stick on Activision necessarily, but that's a model for that.
I mean, this is happening more and more. I mean, even in the studios around us, so Newcastle is actually a pretty big hub for game development. We're seeing a lot of indie studios that get basically swallowed up by these bigger conglomerates, but then the entire studio just ends up shipping one game, and then if that game, again, it's exactly the same as what I just mentioned with Freestyle. It can be even more dangerous in that respect, because if you're going under a studio that doesn't just have this one key title yet, like, oh yeah, we're going to go in and work on all the art for Call of Duty or whatever it is, you can end up getting even more swallowed, where the creatives at the top of that rung, if you get acquired, are like, actually, we're fine, we don't need you, we've got all this, we've actually bought you because you've got a really good animation wing, which is what we need for the next thing we're making. Like, the actual reasons for studios getting acquired sometimes have nothing to do with the IP they're shipping or what they've tried to sell for. And specifically with indies that have gotten to a reasonable mid-stage, they can have been working on an IP, done investor funding to get that IP off the ground, been like, hey, we're going to sell this studio with the game we're working on to a much bigger studio, they're going to publish it because that's what they want. They want a publisher. And then they get there and that studio's like, actually, no, you guys, you're going to be doing this instead, and it's too late by that point. Because
that was the whole thing with Bungie's acquisition as well. The idea that they were sort of acquired because they had mastery of online networking and multiplayer live service games.
Live service.
Then they were internally the body that was then sent to sort of review the idea of The Last of Us as an online service, the future game, the factions game. Which, like I said, for me, it all kind of circles around the idea of PlayStation, or the idea of the PlayStation identity, and what has that been across the last few years, and what does it seem to be going forward. Although it is part of a much wider conversation on the state of the industry, the amount of layoffs, etc. But it is just worth touching on all those things, like the amount of games that we see that are either released broken or just something insane, like the Kong Skull Island game, which was then revealed that it was turned over in a year, which for that game is actually really impressive to turn something over completely for a year. But the realities of the budgeting, the turnaround, the crunch, etc. It is just worth sort of touching on them and getting industry veteran thoughts on those things?
On crunch?
On crunch or anything. I know your thoughts on crunch.
Yeah, you
and
know
everyone
my
else's thoughts on crunch. Crunch sucks.
Crunch does suck, and it's still terrible, and it's still something that is probably going to keep going, because I think what people also forget about the industry is that there isn't any rule book for it yet, and we're still relatively in the Wild West when it comes to studios and what they can and can't ask their employees to do. This is a new industry. You're not dealing with people that have like whole unions and stuff like that. If you look at the SAG stuff that's happening with actors in the States, the unions across game workers, that you've got sometimes studios have their own, but it's all, there isn't one conglomerate thing that's like, we are all going to strike across this to make sure that we're only working on our 9 to 5s. That's not what happens. And studios usually, these terms like, we're a family, we all need to get together to get this over the line. But what can you do when you know that you've got a ship date?
Yeah.
If you've got a ship date and the game is too buggy to ship, are you not going to come in because you don't want to keep your job? Like it places an unfair amount of stress on the workers who are not responsible for when these deadlines was. And it's the production team, it's the marketing team, and it's the people that choose that ship date. And sticking to that ship date, which is which will be whatever deal they have with Sony or with whoever they're shipping with, to make sure that needs to change and relieve that, or build in a certain amount of wedge time for their dev teams so that they know they've got 3 months of wiggle room so that they can fix bugs, add a feature, drop a feature, or at the beginning say no or yes to features that they want to put in a game to come in, so they're not doing that to their employees.
Yes.
And the onus is on the executive team, it's on the head marketing team who managed to choose those dates, it's on the biz dev team that have the deal signed for when they have to ship things by. It is not, and it should never be on the devs who are making the game to have to do that. But that's what happens, sadly, is that it gets pushed onto them to get things across the line.
And then this year has seen some of the worst examples of that in regards to Redfall, Lord of the Rings Gollum, Kong Skull, and like the really over-the-top broken games, and the realities behind how they come together. But in general, it was just a wider conversation on the state of the industry at the minute, using the PlayStation stuff as a bit of a catalyst for that. Any closing thoughts? I know me and you talk loads in the office about the state of the industry and the various tiers of production and stuff, but overall you're quite hopeful about things?
I love video games.
Me too, that's pretty good.
I love video games, I love dev studios, I love indies. I think that even though things are bad, I think that things will get better the more that we learn how to make video games and make them well. And I think that the more success stories and success studios that there are, the better that becomes, and the more infrastructure studios realize that they need to have, like having HR, having payroll, having that stuff, it's going to make this stuff a lot smoother. Or even just understanding, how when you sub to PlayStation, how far in advance your game needs to be made. That's a whole thing that came out of some of Jason Schreier's reporting on Bloomberg, saying that if you go into development now for something that's a AAA game, you're not actually making it for PS5 and Xbox Series systems, you're making it for the next console, because the average dev turnaround is assumedly about 8 to 10 years now, depending on the level of game you're trying to make. And for VR it's even weirder. Right. It gets that's really crazy, confusing. Really. Oh, cross-platform is really weird because your ship date's completely changed because of the different sub-dates that the different things have. So you can put something on Steam, depending on what QA you need to have, it's completely different from where something needs to be, where you've done your QA on it, then it has to go to Sony, then they've got to do their QA on it if they've got QA, and if that doesn't pass, they send that back. So you can have it ready to go on all the other platforms and still not make your ship date for Sony, and then everything else needs to change. Which I've also been there for that. But the reality is, to get back to your point, gaming is wonderful, video games are wonderful, the industry we're in is getting bigger and better, the indies are getting more support. I think there needs to be more protections in place for studios that get swallowed up. There needs to be protections in place for games workers who are on the front lines of making sure games ship so that they don't lose their jobs if a game doesn't make what it's supposed to make. I think that is the only way that churn is going to stop, and that's the only way people aren't going to burn out. Like they say the average length of a games industry worker is from 5 to 8 years, and that's if you're doing well. I don't know how I survived. I must just be a unicorn or something. But
resilient.
Yeah. But the reality is something needs to be put in place to protect these workers, and most likely it's unionizing, which sucks, but that's how it works. Yet again, communism for me.
So this is a massive ongoing conversation. Like I said, I wanted to just touch on a few things, and we'll do some future videos on this. I want to talk more about the realities of games releasing broke and how those, how that all comes together, the realities of the budgeting side of it, and just where the industry's at. Like, it's bigger than ever, and that means that the pitfalls and the stumbles are bigger than ever. But it remains very, very fascinating. I'll put a little video right here. It'll appear on screen for you to check out. After this video.
Where's it going to be?
It's going to be here. It'll be right here.
Right here?
Maybe right here. Maybe there.
Oh,
It'll be somewhere right here.
That's cool.
You just wait and see technology. But for now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I'm Stevie Ward.
We'll catch you very soon.
Bye.
Goodbye.